Hello everyone. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. There are times in life so quiet, so far from the prescribed manner of daily existence, that they warn the soul with a gentle shiver before the ground opens up beneath. It was during such quietness, dense, relentless, that I stood by myself in my hometown home, a creaking, brooding, ancient presence that clung to the far fringes of a grown-out town. My parents had left for the weekend, marking their anniversary with a spontaneous break. They'd asked me to come with them, but my exams were looming and I needed to be able to focus. At least that's what I'd told them. In reality, I'd come to like the quiet, to wrap myself in it like a shroud. I believed it kept the world at bay. I was wrong. The house itself was a contradiction, a reassuring memory of my childhood, but intensely unsettling in its prehistoric hush. The walls were thick with recollections, some joyful, some indistinct, their contours fading with the years. But recently I had been questioning whether those memories were not all mine own. The first evening was quiet. I read, edited, and watched dinner on the quiet TV. The wind outside fought the trees, hissed through the leaves like a wrathful thing. I didn't notice it. The house creaked every now and then because it always creaked when temperature shifted. The sounds were familiar, anticipated, and easy to ignore. It wasn't until late, perhaps 2:13 a.m., that the situation shifted. I lay in bed half asleep with my desk lamp still lit brightly behind me. The quiet had become stifling. No traffic on the street outside, no wind, no hum of the fridge in the kitchen below. Only a hollow, echoing emptiness. It was a type of quiet that left a person feeling like she was somehow an intruder in her own home. Then I heard it, a voice so low that I thought it a figment of my dying mind. A scraunch. Not abrupt, not rapid. A slow, dragging sound, something being dragged on a wooden floor. I tugged my head up and listened closely. Again. Nearer. This time, I could locate the origin. The sound was coming from beneath the floorboards, under my bed. I was frozen, staring at the wooden floor inches away from where my hand rested. The sensation was strange, like I wasn't only hearing the sound, but feeling it too, a low hum vibrating through the beams. My breathing slowed, and the cold air suddenly felt too heavy, too stagnant. There was no basement to the home, just a crawl space covered over. I remembered from childhood, the kind one could crawl into through a hatch in the laundry room closet. My father had cautioned me once never to go down. It was always too small and dangerous, with loose boards, nails, and perhaps even rodents. I had complied, but now something or someone was in it. The sound stopped as abruptly as it began. I lay fitfully until the first light of morning crept through the drapes. Light had always had some kind of protective mystique somehow. Reason disintegrated at dawn. I comforted myself not to worry, that it was only settling of the house, maybe a rodent with something, a byproduct of sleep-deprived fantasies. I nearly convinced myself. Until the second night, I prepared myself this time. I had shut all the doors, drawn in all the windows, and lit downstairs lights. I cautioned myself that I was not going to fall victim to paranoiac childhood foolishness. I even left a kitchen knife within reach under my bed and laughed at myself for it. I slept on watch beside a screen with background white noise, so that if any noises began seeping in, it would mask my tense, racing mind. But white noise can't mask what comes up from down. At the very same time, 2:13 a.m., I felt it again. The dragging. Louder now. Closer. It was no longer creeping beneath the house. It was under my bed, back and forth along the floor's length. I looked up at the ceiling over my head, then down at the floor beneath my feet, my own body rigid, my heart pounding so loudly I feared it would cover any other sound. But I heard something else this time. Breathing. Soft. Slow. Intentional. A rasp of breath in, a wheeze of breath out. each sweep of breath along the bottom of the floor as if the presence, were laid face up on the floor below me, the thin layer of wooden planks the only distance between us. I did not have the courage to make the transition, not even move towards the knife. I just lay there, counting seconds, my head pounding at the edge of wonder. The breathing continued and continued. Hours, I thought, although I now realized that it could not have taken more than a minute or so, and then it stopped. Not slowly, but all at once, as if someone had flipped a switch. The resulting silence was worse than the sounds it supplanted. I didn't go downstairs until morning, not wanting to give in to the fright now adhering to me like damp garments. I stumbled stiffly down to the laundry room and stood in front of the hatch. I barely remembered when last it opened. It was covered in dust, still unopened, unchanged. But the metal catch indicated otherwise, fresh, recently relocated, scratches on either side. Intentional, deep, tiny scratches, as though they attempted to scrape out, or in. I shut the laundry room door and locked it. That night I didn't sleep. I sat on the couch, every light in the house burning, the TV blaring some meaningless channel that I never watched. I would not sleep, would not so much as blink for 1 second, lest if I relinquished even a millimeter of awareness I would never wake up again. And again, at 2:13 a.m., the lights had gone out. Once, for a fleeting moment, but long enough to scare me. The television flashed and hummed, only to return seconds afterward. I paralyzed, glued to the TV screen as the image was temporarily distorted by static. Then the dragging resumed again, but not under the floor. No, it was on the hallway floor. The very same slow, agonizing groan of heaviness on wood, moving along inch by inch. I took a breath. The noise stopped on the other side of the entrance to the living room. There was nothing that I could see through the door. The light still flashed on and off. The air felt foul, pressurized. I knew there was something beyond that wall. Waiting. Listening. Perhaps it had known all along that I knew that it was present. I slept no that night. When morning arrived, there was no sign of entry, no footprints, no smudges, no broken lock. And yet, the laundry room door was open. I had locked it. I was positive. I should have left then. I should have packed a bag and left. But fear is an interesting thing. It has you waiting. It creates excuses. And so I stayed. A final night. A final trial to determine if I still had my head on my shoulders. I set up cameras, one in my bedroom, one in the hallway, and one in the laundry room aimed directly at the hatch. I watched from my phone, all feeds silently. 2:00 a.m. Nothing. 2:05 a.m. Silence. 2:10 a.m. Movement. On the laundry room camera feed, the hatch rattled, not opened, rattled, like something underneath was pushing against it, slowly, patiently. Then the camera flickered, the image distorted, cut to black, then back. The hatch was open. Nothing had come near it, nothing anyone could see at least. The hallway camera picked up something else. A shadow, twisted, tall, moving just on the border of the camera. Off proportions. Too tall, too long limbs, scraping across the floor but not producing a sound. I wanted to break the feed, but I couldn't. Then the camera in my room picked up activity. A flicker. A shadow standing in the corner, behind me. I automatically twirled around, phone dropping from my fingers. The room was empty. No movement, no figure. Only the remotest scent of dirt and decay lingering in the air. That was the final blow. I left at dawn, never again to be alone. My parents came home that night to find the house just as they'd left it, except the laundry room hatch was nailed up with 6 nails. My father testified he'd closed it years ago, that it had always been closed, but I'm on to them. Something was beneath that floor, something old, clever, and lying in wait. It was waiting beneath me, breathing life from the darkness, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And when it figured out I'd noticed it, it tried to catch me. We have stories that we tell ourselves so that we can sleep at nights. Stories which place monsters beneath closets, beneath beds, or out in the woods. But the truth is worse than that. For sometimes the monster is beneath your bed. Sometimes it hides beneath your floor. And sometimes when the house is still, when you are alone and the world outside sleeps, it listens and it stirs. I did not sleep the night I escaped. Even though I had left the house far behind, miles and miles away, its breath lingered at the nape of my neck, the weight of its existence smothering my mind like an indelible stain that would not be wiped off. Reason, my anchor, had collapsed in the face of doubt. It wasn't merely the possibility of being observed or trailed. It was the realization that I had been touched by something that I did not know or comprehend. I kept quiet about it for weeks. My parents attributed my actions to stress, perhaps school pressures, or the weight of loneliness. I did not correct them. I could not explain to them what I saw in that house without being broken, cut loose from reason, separated from the world that demanded straight thinking. Evil does not draw straight lines, and still the notion persisted. That hatch, those sounds, the shape uncovered on tape, too vague to be man, the wheezing beneath floorboards. It didn't add up. It didn't stay in my head. I was waking up at 2:13 in the morning wherever I was sleeping, in hotels and friends' homes, always at precisely the same time, heart racing, ears listening in darkness for creaking footsteps that never came. Until they did. It was in a flat we rented a month after I'd left home. I'd tried to establish some sort of routine, lessons, meals, distractions, but tonight, it struck me again. The wobble of lights, the wobble of the displays on electric screens, and then the soft, squeezing hiss of dragging. Not in the flat, above it. At first I thought it was the tenant in the flat above. Then I recalled. I was at the top. There was nothing above but roof. The noise continued for over an hour. I'm on the ground, staring up at the ceiling, and I noticed the plaster quiver by the narrowest margin, dust specks descending in light, otherworldly spirals. My brain struggled with the facts, but my body absorbed the truth. I did not scream. I did not run. I simply listened, windpipe constricted in my chest, as the scraping traveled along one edge of the ceiling and then another, and directly above me. It ceased. And then there was breathing, that same wet, wheezing breath I'd left behind at the cursed house. It was hovering in the ceiling, impossibly close, as if what was between it and me was now paper thin. I could feel it, its hunger, its weight. It had followed me down. That night was the last night I spent in that apartment. I returned home the next day, not because I believed that it was safe, but because I needed to know. I needed to know if the house was different, if the source of the terror had retreated, or if it had only multiplied. My parents were away again by coincidence or fate. The house was untouched, empty. I entered with caution and resolve, my footsteps echoing against the tremulous walls like a warning. I proceeded directly to the laundry room. The hatch remained nailed shut, but the door to the room itself was open. I'd shut it up before I left. I remember. I stood there for an extremely long period of time beside the hatch, something inside me unspooling. My fingers trembled, my eyes began to blur. I knelt down and put my ear against the wood, and I heard it. Not breathing this time, scratching, soft at first, then faster, like frantic fingers scratching at the rim of the hatch, frantic to escape. My flesh numb, the air vibrating with a note too low to be heard but too real to be denied. And I heard something else too. A voice, not in words, not in any words I had, but something spoken from beneath the wood, a mumbled, broken mouth spewing hate, hunger, and a foul recognition. It knew me, it remembered me, and it wanted me back. Something inside me snapped at that moment. Not courage, not recognition, surrender. I knew the truth that had teased just out of reach since the first night it began. This thing, whatever it was, never emerged from under. It emerged from within. The floorboards, the walls, the ceiling, these were not barriers. These were receptacles. The house had never been conventionally haunted. It was a vessel, a membrane for something old, something that writhed beneath reality, leaping from location to location and individual to individual like rot through wood. And I had let it in. Maybe by seeing it, by understanding it, I had become inside its confines. Wherever I moved, it followed me, not by movement, but by presence. It didn't require the house. It required me in isolation. I slowly got up, a shiver running through my veins. Not fear, but some inexplicable invasion that I couldn't put words to. I stepped out of the laundry room, out of the house, and I did not look back. I have not returned since, and I know it. Each night at 2:13 a.m., I sense it, not in hearing, not in sight, but in pressure. A heaviness at the back of my eyes, a presence lurking from empty corners. Sometimes, while I am sleeping, I have a dream of floorboards which curve upwards, creak open like ribs, and reveal dark tunnels that breathe and whisper and wait. I have no idea what it needs. Perhaps it lives on consciousness or fear. Perhaps it simply desires to drain me, to make me a vessel like the house had been. Or perhaps it waits, is immortal, will relish torturing me until I am a vessel like the house had been. Whatever the truth is, I've resigned myself to trying to escape it. There's no place to go anymore. I've looked, traveled, slept in cold motel rooms and swarmed airports. But still, at that damn time, I wake up, and I know it is already there. It was always there. So I'm writing this now not as a warning, for warnings foretell a chance of evasion, but as a confession. If you're reading this, if the quiet in your house gets too heavy, if the air gets stale around 2:13 a.m., and you can hear dragging beneath your bed, you've already been chosen, and it is listening. There are things in life that appear insignificant as they pass by. Mundane decisions, careless choices taken on impulse. But when you look back, they glare with the intensity of horror, as if the world had attempted to convey something through me that I never bothered to listen to. That Thursday of the subsequent November was one such. I had been off work for the week, lying in after a string of exhausting months, and my roommates, as if understanding my requirement of alone time, had departed for their own individual holiday vacations. At noon, the house was mine alone, a still two-story house on the outskirts of town with creaking boards, open windows, and a mysterious past nobody seemed to know anything about. It had always sat a bit awkwardly, as if it never really sank into the comfort of being termed home, and yet I had dismissed such feelings for the sake of cost and convenience. The first evening alone ushered in an awkward stillness, the sort that creeps around you rather than freeing you. There was no TV blaring in the background, no spectral whispers of voices through walls, only the hollow, thrumming quiet of being alone. I attempted to drown it out with music first, but the tunes sounded too artificial, too alien against the nauseating emptiness that filled the house. Eventually, I surrendered and turned everything off, enveloping myself in the quiet like a heavy, smothering blanket. I woke up at 2:13 a.m. suddenly, the type of waking that was not caused by noise or light, but by a change in air, a tightening of the air, an unexplainable wakefulness that hits the center. I listened carefully, lying flat in bed. There was nothing initially. Then a noise, muffled but clear, a sound of something heavy being pulled over wood with a gentle scratch. Not frantic or panicked, but controlled, calculating. It was coming from above us, the attic. And so, for comprehension, the attic of this house was not a stair or a doorway into it, but a hatch boarded into the upstairs hallway ceiling. An old, dusty room no one of us had ever entered. We had no use to enter it, no use to require it. But to us then, It seemed like it had a life. I reminded myself it was nothing. Wind, maybe, or creaking old boards. I was able to sleep again, though the ache hung just below awareness, like an outstretched, unseen hand. In the morning, I discovered the attic hatch left ajar. That reality, harmless, ready to be brushed aside, took hold in my mind. I stood under it for a moment, looking at the narrow gap in the ceiling. It hadn't been like that before. Of that, I was sure. Dust covered the floor under it, as if recently stirred. But I did nothing to check. I just jammed a chair under the hatch and, using the broom handle, wedged it shut. I didn't want to know. Not because I was afraid of something concrete, but because I was afraid of confirmation of my increasing suspicion that something was watching. The second evening saw the return of the commotion. This time it did not stay confined to the attic. At 3:41 a.m. I heard quiet, purposeful steps coming down the stairs. The type of steps that walk with care for every creaking board, skipping over certain spots to stay silent. I didn't move. I lay under the bedclothes, frozen stiff as a block of ice, heart pounding so violently it seemed to vibrate in the air. The footsteps came down the stairs and halted. There were minutes. Then abruptly they resumed, more hesitantly now, as though aware they'd made a sound. The coming back wasn't sudden, but appallingly slow. On the third morning, I discovered tiny impressions on the wood floors down the corridor. Small depressions, such as the impressions of finger marks, not fingerprints, but the pressure impressions that remain when something heavy moves or drags itself along. I knelt to take a closer look and saw the trace of soot or ash in the grooves. A metallic scent remained. I started to wonder if I was going crazy. Days of solitary confinement distort vision, blur fantasy and reality into each other. But hallucinations don't appear in the physical world. Paranoia doesn't cause attic hatches to suddenly open. And fear, as basic and as ancient as fear of fire, doesn't break out unprovoked. The fourth night I was prepared. I left the hallway light on. I had the phone next to me with the flash on standby. I was in bed, not asleep, but listening. Time was warped in that house. Minutes yawned and hours bunched up. When the dragging resumed, it was joined by something new. A low guttural sound. Not a growl or a moan, but a vibration in the air, like something breathing through walls not designed for lungs. Then a creaking from the hatch in the attic. Not with hostility, but with stiff, grudging reluctance. I did not have to step out of the room to be able to listen. The noise was unmistakably loud, and the dust from the hatch drifted silently to the floor below. Footsteps shortly afterward. Not coming down this time, but creeping down the hall. Slow, quiet, as if to see how far it could go without being noticed. I flipped on the flashlight and prepared myself. Nothing showed, but the footsteps just ceased beyond my door. No shadow was visible under the door. No movement or knock. Only that strangling feeling of being watched. I remained in that position for more than an hour, struggling for air, until the sound of footsteps receded. In the morning, I made up my mind. I would go. I scolded myself as a fool for having yielded to foolish fear. But raw fright gnawing at my very heart had an argument of its own. And yet whenever I approached opening the front door, it could not be made to budge. It wasn't blocked. I struggled with the mechanism, nor jammed by weather or rubbish. It wouldn't open, wrapped, so to speak, by something intangible. I attempted the rear door, windows, all for nothing. Fear started to replace reason. I pounded glass, yelled through windless silence, but the sound was stifled by the land. I'd been shuttled into a vacuum. That evening I didn't rest. The house creaked. It didn't pose as sleeping anymore. Doors swelled open independently. Lights changed without the existence of a power surge. The pipes grunted in cadence that nearly came to verbal speaking, an atrocious, untalked dialect grumbling out from beneath floors. And I saw it. It was at the top of the stairs, not a human figure but a shape, a silhouette-cut shadow blacker than black. Its border was rough, unfixed, like a being in transformation. No eyes, and I felt it looking through walls, through skin, into bone. It did not stir, it just glared. I stood rooted, unwilling to gaze upon it, because I thought gazing upon it in its entirety would make it strong, that it drew strength from consciousness, terror. It vanished before dawn, leaving a quiet so complete it seemed to engulf sound as well. On the 6th day I abstained. Not volitionally. The food had gone bad overnight. Sealed cans were even inexplicably swollen, with a noxious odor. The fridge buzzed futilely without electricity. Water became dark if drawn from the tap, coated with sediment and having an iron smell. The house was rotting inwardly, and I, incidentally, started disintegrating inwardly. The atmosphere thickened. I could feel breathing behind me if I remained stationary. Shadows stretched in opposition to the light direction. The mirrors picked up not my movement, but trailing movements. Slow, warped, taunting. I had once discovered all the doors of the house flung wide open. Not only unfastened, but flung wide open. Even the hatch to the attic, now gaping like a mouth ripped into the ceiling. Out of its depths issued a sound like teeth colliding, not actually audible, but psychically shattering as though something was speaking through bone. That evening I did not conceal myself. I sat in the middle of the living room and waited. Whatever lived in this house no longer needed to conceal itself. It had prevailed. My shields had weakened, my mind splintered. I could sense its breath against the back of my neck before I ever sensed its footsteps, but it never touched me. It simply lingered. For hours. I realized that it thrived on closeness, not savagery. That it had no desire to annihilate, but to unpeel. Its mission was to see, to watch the agonizing unsticking of sanity, as a child would tear off the wings of a moth, not in wickedness, but curiosity. On the last morning, if one could call it that, for the sun no longer skimmed the windows, I discovered the walls bleeding. Tar-like substance oozed from each crack, each corner, as if the house had started to grieve. The air was thick with the smell of rot, and I, a shadow of what I once was helpless but to devour what I was witnessing. Then, out of nowhere, the front door opened. Not in ceremony, but with quiet indifference, as if it had never been shut. Sunlight poured in, clean, golden, warm. The house sighed, the pressure released, and the silence drifted away like smoke on wind. I stepped out. My legs trembled, flesh pale and cold despite the light. I looked back once. The house, unchanged, silent, watching. I never went back. I never talked to anyone. The house stood, sold months afterward to an old couple who had no idea about its hunger. At times I catch myself wondering if it still stares, still waits. What I went through was not an haunting. It was an awakening, a vision of the quiet evil that lies in hidden places, that nourishes itself not on life, but on presence. It showed me that horror is not violence, but the decay of certainty, in the knowledge that we are never really alone, not even at home, not even in ourselves. There are nights where silence is sanctuary, a quiet shroud that soothes the soul. There are nights, however, when the same silence turns evil, almost alive. It listens, it breathes, it watches. It was on that night that I learned what silence keeps. It was midwinter. Snow had covered the suburbs in thick, pure white, damping all sound like nature's own soundproofing. My parents were away in a city in the next state for a funeral, and had left me in charge of the house to watch over it for the weekend. I was 17 years old, very sure of myself, and well able to take care of myself. I thought being alone was something I could manage. I embraced it. I even anticipated it. That first night alone, I went through the usual night procedure, turned porch lights off, locked doors, and double-checked the windows. There was nothing out of the usual in the air or the house. Everything was as dull as could be. If anything, it was too dull. Spick and span, vacant, almost too quiet. I thought it was all my own doing and went to bed at 11. I was awakened with a jolt about 2 a.m. I had no idea why. There was no noise, no motion, no dream I could remember. But my eyes sprang open as if kicked by some hidden stimulus. The room was black, the only faint orange penetration of the streetlight through the blinds. I remained motionless for a couple of minutes, attempting to quiet my heartbeat. The air was heavier than normal, thick, almost metallic, as if it were filled with some quiet horror. I sat up and glanced at the door to my bedroom, expecting it to swing open. It did not. All was still. And yet, there was a presence, an unmistakable sense of being watched. I dismissed it. I told myself that loneliness was trying to creep into my head. But I knew better. Something had altered in the mood in that house. The following morning, all was normal. I convinced myself that I had only dreamt feeling ill at ease. I scrubbed the day out, watched television, even giggled at a film, giggled as if my mind already cast aside the odd heaviness of last night. But again, at night, I felt it. The feeling of being watched. The shadows became darker. The corners of the house further withdrew. Even the wall clock ticked loudly, as if time itself was being played back deliberately to remind me I was by myself. I double and triple checked that all doors and windows were locked. Again. I pulled the curtain shut, turned on a nightlight, and did not switch off the hall light. All of these were things I would never normally do. But fear, I found, makes you overcautious. Sleep increasingly overtook me that night. It was more a matter of being unconscious due to exhaustion than sleeping. But once more I awoke. The clock was 3:08 a.m. This time I am certain that I heard it. Movement. It was quiet. Slowing. Not the loud groan of wood, but the barely perceptible shift of a weight. I didn't move, my ears locked into silence. There it was again. A faint scratch, like something heavy had been scraped across the linoleum kitchen floor below. My breath clogged in my throat. I compelled myself not to panic. I told myself it must be the house settling, the heating system, a rodent, perhaps, something to give shape to the unknown. But the sound returned, this time closer, louder, more intentional, and then silence. Long, lingering silence that screamed in my ears. I grabbed my phone, but it was useless. I had not charged it. A mean twist of fate. The kind that looks harmless in the daytime, but is totally awful when you are desperate. I thought about leaving the room, but something stronger than fear froze me, some basic primal freezing. And then there was a breathing. It wasn't mine. It was from the hallway outside my door. Deep, paced, deliberate breathing. Not huffing and puffing, not panicked. It sounded purposeful, the way one breathed so as not to be heard. That single note overshadowed any logical thought passing through my head. I lay there in bed, my heart pounding inside my chest. My fists clenched the blanket so hard that my knuckles hurt. I glared at the door, hoping it would creak open. It didn't, though. Instead, the breathing slowly died away. Not because it ceased, but because it went down the hallway away from my bedroom. Each step grew softer, like whatever walked back into the far ends of the house. The rest of the evening was spent in miserable silence. By morning, I questioned my own sanity. I desperately wanted to believe that I had dreamed the whole thing. Sleep deprivation, maybe, hallucinations from hearing, a deranged nightmare. But when I went downstairs, I found something that chilled my blood. The back door was open. Not open, wide open. Snow had blown in through the door, melting onto the kitchen floor. Bare and human footprints, damp, stained the tile in ragged lines. They started at the door and disappeared somewhere on the living room carpet. But no footprints went out. Something, or somebody, had come into the house that night, but not departed. I scoured every inch of that house during the daytime, every closet, every crawl space, even the attic. Zip. Zero. Nobody was there. My logical mind said they had escaped before I awoke and had erased their trail. But something in me, deeper, more primal, stalked the sense that the presence lingered. I didn't eat. I couldn't. It was wrong, invasive to even consider putting something into my body. The house wasn't mine anymore, something else owned it now. I could sense it in the walls. By the time I reached in late evening, I was wondering whether I should go, run to a neighbor, call anyone. But then I did not wish to give sound to the open door, the footprints, or that suffocating fear. I was aware that if I say it out, it would be true, and I wished for it to stay in my thoughts. I did not sleep that evening. I would not sleep. I was in bed with the lights on and eyes fixed on the ceiling, watching hours tick by. Midnight came and went. Then 1 a.m., then 2, and then I heard it. A noise like nothing I'd ever heard. A low, vibrating thrum, like the reverberation of a voice whispered underwater. It emanated from below the floor, deep and ancient. Not machine-like, but living. Like a groan, a moan, a lament. It swelled and receded rhythmically, thrumming through the beams of the house itself. I got up from my bed and crept towards the floor vent. The noise was increasing, and then, from the vent, a whisper, so faint, so mangled, that I couldn't make out its words, but it was unmistakably human. Someone was speaking in the house. I fled. I didn't care how stupid it sounded. I ran barefoot out of the house into the cold snow and did not slow down until I was standing on the porch of the neighbor's house. I pounded on the door until they opened it. I had to have been furious, my eyes wild, my body shaking, unable to speak. But they respected me enough to call the police. They went through the house floor to ceiling. Nothing. No footprints, no open doors, no signs of forced entry. They discovered only one thing, a freshly disturbed small square section of the basement wall. The drywall had been ripped off and replaced, kind of. Behind it was a hole the size of a person's body. They discovered a sleeping bag and a journal. The notes devoured the pages again and again, mostly illegible, mad scribbles. There was one, however, written in trembling letters. The boy does not know that I live here. I stand and look at him as he sleeps. His breathing is still. He will hear me soon. He will see me soon. And then I will have to hide no longer. They never discovered the man who had penned those words, or how long he had been hidden within the walls of my home. The only conclusion drawn was that he had been living there in secret for weeks or maybe months. Observe me. Learn about me. Wait for something. The authorities had filled in the hole, and my parents came back the following day. They attempted to comfort me, to explain to me what had transpired, but I knew better. Some things cannot be explained. Some evil is not loud or violent. It is waiting, quiet. It watches, it waits, and when it finally reveals itself, it is already too late. I never went back to that house after that. We left shortly after that, but silence has never been safe for me ever since. It always appears to be claimed now, like something still inhabits the space where there ought to be silence, because silence, I've learned, is never ever vacant. It is merely the moment suspended by whatever awaits to be looked at. At last, the house was boarded up and was placed for sale, sold to a couple who gave no indication that they had been disturbed by the tale. They were the rational sort, agnostics, not superstitious types. But from time to time, I could not help but speculate on how much that reason remained in position following the sale of the house. My parents tried to make me forget. The therapists were summoned. Reading material was handed out. Even priests came by, though nothing had been officially categorized as paranormal. But it wasn't ghosts that scared me. It was individuals. Individuals who burrow into areas where they don't belong, who discover your patterns, who share the same air you do in secret. That sort of presence leaves no curse, no ghostly souvenir, only a lingering warp in the lens by which you perceive the world. I stayed hypervigilant for months after the move. I wouldn't sleep unless all the closets were open, every crevice under the bed searched, every hatch in the attic locked from the outside. But despite all the security measures, there was still fear. It was an umbra sewn on my awareness, increasing silently, becoming increasingly profound in isolation. I started feeling things I did not understand. It began innocently. Things went missing only to reappear where I had placed them. Doors I closed were found just slightly ajar. The scent of strange cologne wafted through hallways, all too easily explained, until the sounds came back. Not creaks, not footsteps, breathing. Again, it started at night, just at the edge of where I lay. This time, I knew it immediately. That slow, purposeful beat. Not hysterical, not tired, purposeful. It would come and go, never in the presence of other human beings. I began to record myself at night, placing my phone on the dresser with the voice memo activated. The initial couple of nights, nothing. But then, on the fifth take, I heard it. At precisely 3:12 a.m., a long quiet period, and then gentle, unmistakable breathing. Louder, nearer, and then, most terrifying of all, my own voice, slurred in sleep, whispering some incomprehensible syllable. I had not remembered dreaming, but the realization that I had spoken to the darkness was sufficient to make me shiver. I took the tape to my parents. They assured me it is interference. White noise, probably the heating element again. I saw it, though, in their eyes. Doubt. Doubt about what the world had devolved to since the night. Not myself. Neither one of them did either. Several weeks later, I discovered something that made me sick. On an otherwise ordinary morning, folding laundry, I saw that the attic hatch was open. I never opened it myself. My father never used it much, only with a ladder. The fact that it had been opened from inside loomed over me like a crushing hand on my lungs. I stood there, looking up at the thin rectangle of open blackness. The ladder had also been in the garage. No one was going to get out of there without it, unless no one was getting out. I don't recall climbing. I don't recall feeling strong enough or even knowing that I had to. I recall flinging the hatch open wide and dragging myself up into the attic with shaking so hard it slid along the beams. The attic had the scent of stale insulation and something pungent. Dust was in the air, choking the air. I didn't see anything out of the ordinary at first. Luggage, old Christmas ornaments, boxes. Then, however, I noticed in the back of the attic that there was a dip in the insulation. A bed made of only a blanket and flattened cardboard. Next to it, another journal. It was of the same form as the one discovered behind the basement wall. I opened it in horror and read a couple of lines before my body reacted. I had cold sweat all over my skin. The lines were brief, fragmented, dated. He changed addresses. Took time to track him down again, but I remembered his face. I remembered his breath. He sleeps better now. Perhaps he trusts the silence again. Soon, I had fallen, and I had stumbled backward down through the attic hatch, and I plunged down the hall to the ground floor. It was the night I slept the last time ever under the roof. The police were summoned once again. The attic was searched, this time thoroughly. There was no indication of recent habitation, but the diary did exist. It was sealed as evidence, and once again, a manhunt was launched for someone who left no fingerprints, no name, no recognizable identity. The official explanation? An obsessive vagrant, a drifter, even a one-time neighbor of the old house who had become obsessed with me after the first break-in. That was the logical tale. The tale you tell yourself so you can still live a normal life. But I didn't believe in logical tales anymore. I fled home altogether shortly thereafter. I moved. I changed my name. I deleted all social media accounts. And yet, at night, in hotel rooms, in rented apartments, in public places lighted up, I sometimes catch it. Not a presence, not a sound, a pattern, as if something learning, growing, falling into sync with my habits, my routines, my breathing. As if what tormented me was not a human, but an idea that gained a life of its own, something that existed not in flesh, but in the dark places between shores of safety. It is not always watching, it is not always present, but it always knows how to come back. And now, at my 32nd year, writing this from wherever I won't say, in a house without an attic, without a crawl space, without a basement, I still leave lights on at night. I still dust flour along the door to trap footprints. I still lock up all the doors, tape up all the vents, and plug in earbuds to drown out the night. And sometimes I hear it, breathing. And once I heard something worse. A whisper. A light, barely audible whisper through the hum of quiet, spoken in the darkest corner of my room, later than midnight. You see me now? It was a Saturday night, with the sort of stillness that heralds something more than the usual, that I traveled down the empty back road. The rain drummed relentlessly against the windshield, each drop falling into the last in a wall of a curtain shutting out the world beyond the glass. The weather had fallen to disaster unheralded, and even though I had watched the news, it had not revealed the storm now raging outside. I had ridden to a funeral for a relative, a distant uncle. My parents had ordered me to attend in the name of the family, and I, with reluctant duty, had ridden 3 hours out of town into the countryside to attend. And now, driving back down the black, empty road into town, I was full of a shutting-in feeling I could barely put into words. Not fear, but a sense of being pinned in the awareness that I was being watched by something out of the dark emptiness past the trees. With every mile, the rain grew heavier, and my visibility dwindled to less than a few feet ahead of me. My own hands grasped the wheel more tightly, as the headlamps seemed to accomplish nothing at all in the face of the deluge. The windshield wipers flailed futilely against the flood, flinging water back and forth in a struggle they could never hope to win. It was there, through the rain darkness, that I saw a man who was at the roadside. I had at first believed I was witnessing some rain joke, a mailbox or a tree stump. But as I approached closer, there was no illusion. There was a man, not winking. He wore what looked like a long black coat, head slightly bent, water dripping from the brim of a broad hat. He did not wave for assistance. He simply stood there, gazing at the road like he was waiting for something, or somebody. I automatically slammed on my brakes, not sure whether to go or stay. But as I passed by him, I saw his face under the streetlight, and something inside me flinched. His face was skeletal and white, and even with the hat over his eyes, I could feel them glinting dimly, odd beneath it. It was not the sheen of light, it was something else. I drove on, uneasy, but determined to show what I had seen. I reproached myself, it was illusion of rain and fatigue. He might be just a passerby or a householder caught off his feet by the storm. But in rear view, in behind me, on the road there was nothing. The figure disappeared. I had been driving for another 10 minutes when the engine spluttered. The car stuttered, lurched, and ground to a halt. I found myself stuck in an unfamiliar side road, running down a plantation of trees with no mobile signal. I remained in the car in the cold, steaming up the inside of the car, and attempted to reason out what was wrong. And then I noticed something even bleaker than that. The rain had stopped altogether, not slowed down, not decreased, stopped. It had altered so violently, so completely, that I didn't even know it had stopped until I could hear the sound of my own breathing reverberating off the blackness. I slipped out of the car silently, chattering teeth against wet rag to the coat. Roadside trees stood unnaturally still, branches unbent by any gust of wind. All was quiet in the world, suspended in some temporary state. No noise at all from any insects. In the distance, I saw a glimmer of light on the horizon, a something barely discernible, as faint as the flutter of a snapped lantern. Having nowhere else to go, I headed toward it, driven by a frustrated blend of curiosity and desperation. The path was rough, in places waterlogged, muddy, and overgrown with brambles. It thickened and resisted with each step, as if ghostly hands persistently pulled me back. I fought to focus on the light, but the woods closed in around me, inflating into unseen markers that I recognized. I wondered if I was circling around back into me, and yet I had spent there with the presence of light. A weathered wood hut in the middle of woods. Its windows were black, but a lantern groaned suspended over the veranda, swaying gently though the wind was not blowing. I glided silently, weight of invisible eyes on my shoulders. My hand shook when I turned the handle, and I do not know why I attempted it, but it swung open smoothly. The door squeaked onto a thin corridor crowded with darkness. The house was damp and moldy. Wallpaper peeled from the walls, and floorboards under your feet creaked horribly in bouts of whimsy. I stumbled down the hall unwillingly, yelling to alert you that I was approaching, although nothing issued from my lips. My voice, something that I'd simply always just taken as a right of mine to use, was now something I had no right to use anymore. Every inch of that house had waited, not filled, not left. Waiting. I moved through a line of rooms, each one vacant, except for scraps of furniture swathed in white sheets that fluttered even in the heat. And then I saw him again, standing at the other end of the hallway, the same tall stranger I'd seen out of the way from the highway. His own hat was cast across his face, hiding all except the rim of his left eye, but I could feel the same look burning into me. I tried to back away blindly, but my feet were rooted. I stood there, immobile, my legs propped up by something more fundamental than fear, a fundamental sense of having encountered something less than human. He slowly lifted his hand and waved down the hall behind me. I turned and looked, and I couldn't believe it. The hall was not the house hall, but something else. A black curved path line with doors, each door standing wide enough to show a glimpse of blackness behind. I turned to look at the figure again. It vanished. I barely avoided stumbling in front of each of the vacant prattle of the doors. Cold dripped in advance of it. Walls were crying, a sticky tar-like substance oozing down, clotted on the ground. Something is shifting behind those doors, not in my body, but in my head. Photos I'd taken way back in my own past come flooding over me once more in crystal stillness. Guilty secrecy, shameful pictures, flashbacks of fear which I had thought I'd long since shed. The house was summoning me in, and suddenly, without warning, a left-hand door swung open with stark, unadorned force, and I was drawn in by some unseen hand. The room was blacker than coal, with only one chair in the middle of the room lit up. I was shoved into it, restrained by unseen hands, and a screen was lowered over my eyes from above. Then the photographs started. Not dreams, not visions, but memories. My memories projected onto the screen in twisted detail. All my failures, all my betrayals, all my weaknesses, but twisted, distorted from its natural shape. The voice is mine, but not truly, as if to speak human words, but not waking. And over each memory, watching, stood the man. I struggled to scream, to turn my head, to shut my eyes, but my body refused to obey. Time had stopped moving in any way that made sense to me. I might have been there for minutes or hours or days. I no longer had any measures of time here. The screen went black, and I was released. I stumbled out of the room, exhausted and bewildered. The corridor was there, changed, filthy and dripping, walls crumbling as living. I saw something at the end of the corridor, creatures crawling the ceiling, spilling words into a language older than memory. I ran. Legs pounded against the ground less than a mile, and walls behind me closing, slamming, crashing as I went. When at last I flung open the front door wide, I was once more met by the patter of the rain. I stood dripping, gazing out into the woods. Behind me, the house creaked and groaned in apparent disapproval. I glanced back at it, but it wasn't there. There was only heavy woods instead. I ran until running no longer functioned, until the road once more and my car subsequently. The engine picked up on the first lap. The rain kept falling, but now more lightly, earthy. I arrived home a couple of hours later. I said nothing about what I'd found because I knew that no one would believe me. But since then, things just haven't been the same. I see him sometimes, in mirrors, out of a window, in a puddle, in the sheen on a wet sidewalk. Always for just a moment, just long enough to remind. He is still waiting. And I think deep down in myself that the house is still waiting too. And one rainy night, when the rain rains hard enough, it will follow me again. Since that evening, I've existed in a broken half of myself. To everyone else, I'm still the same me I've always been. Introverted, shy, maybe even more shy, just to everyone else. But internally, things have changed. The world no longer rests safely under my feet. It's off-center at the ends, curving sometimes in directions that make me question if I am dreaming or caught with it again in that infinite corridor of doors. The guy comes by more often nowadays, not asleep, for now I am no longer a victim of sleep's weakness, but in stillness on rain-washed glass, on the gleam of a coffee spoon curve, on the soft glaze of a work-worn TV screen. He is with me when I am alone, never stirring, never closing his eyes, gazing with the same enigmatic eyes as if holding his breath for my acceptance of some unstated bargain which I had unwittingly entered. I had assumed initially to believe that it was trauma, hallucination, the tail end of some complete psychological collapse. I attempted to speak to a therapist, navigating the thin edge of what precisely had occurred, but her smile became increasingly more rehearsed in every session, and I was aware she was stuffing me into neat boxes. Grief, stress, dissociation. She didn't witness the truth. Nobody did. 2 months in, something strange occurred. I came home one night after 2 days of straight work. It was raining gently after dark, not in huge amounts, but sufficient to sparkle on the sidewalk. Rain with gravity to its silence. And when I strolled past one of the many, many alleys which I had strolled past, I heard it. Something that doesn't belong. It was the creak of a very old wooden door pushing open slowly. I stopped in my step. The alleyway was clear. No door, no entrance, any part of it that could potentially make the noise. But I knew. It was the house. The smell of the foul-smelling door creaking open, wafting its next victim the aroma. Something was behind me. I departed and went outside, but the commotion followed me, trailing behind, growing further away as if it was flying, as if it would again wait for the moment I would be not in throngs. That evening, I had another dream about the corridor, only this time I was not in control. I was with the doors. I was stretched tight over walls, my head jammed into against clean wood and iron knobs. I noticed as I noticed a hollow-eyed and demoralized me went by without even so much as actually noticing me. And behind him then the man. I opened my eyes, mud in my mouth. No reason, no door. Nothing but rubbish wedged between my teeth and against the roof of my mouth, as if I'd slept face down in the woods. I dug where the house had stood. Old maps, missing towns, lost roads. At last, beneath hills of local myth and archive dust, I hit something, a reference to a house that roamed. They called it the Mourner's Refuge, a battered, unlicensed cabin reported to be seen by them that carry unwit sorrow. Never in one place. Whispers, sinister and haphazard, of stranded travelers lost in blizzards. Witnesses who have given testimony to the same. The lantern house, the hat man, the subdued memories turned upon them. The others still thought the house wasn't a house anyway, but an experiment, a sacrifice of atonement for the mind. A house constructed not to destroy, but to unveil. To unveil what had been buried under years of denial, deception, and wretched desperation. It had made sense in a fashion. I had not cried at the funeral. I had not grieved. I'd attended, recited the words, and returned home as though it was the same as it always was. There was a difference. The house had witnessed what I'd pretended wasn't present, and it was now sitting there waiting for me to misunderstand again. Weeks went by, and months. I changed jobs, moved cities, attempted to shed as much of my past as possible. I believed naively that distance would save me, that moving fast enough would render it out of reach. One cannot outrun oneself. It caught up with me again on the anniversary of my uncle's death. Another apartment complex, another town, but the same storm. I awoke to drips, steady, slow, rhythmic. I frowned at the ceiling. No leak. Windows closed, and yet dripped. And I noticed the footprints. Wet, dirty footprints from my front door, through the living room, and just short of my bed. I was no longer alone. The air was heavy with decay. My eyes watered. And at the foot of my bed, in the soft blue light of the storm lamp, stood the man. But he did not call. He spread his hand. I knew then. This was not a haunting. This was an invitation to come home, to complete what had begun. I stood. I took his hand, and instantly my room disappeared. The city, the sounds, the false light, everything dissolved into the darkness. I stood again in front of the house, its lantern gently swinging back and forth across the porch, its long, shivering shadows casting in the wet dirt. And this time, I did not wait. I went inside unhesitating. The hallway was inviting. The doors opened, and the whispers no longer silly. They were whispering my name. This was not a prison. It was a mirror. And I, and all those who had come before me, had to walk down its corridors, turn each open door, face the things I dug up and held hidden and in denial about, and forgot. You can't leave the house. Not ever. Not for the people for whom they built it. I understand now why the man watches. He is no animal. He is a shepherd, a protector of the gate between denial and accounting. And one day you will face him face to face as well, when the rain rains harder than it ever should, when muffled sounds echo more loudly than storms, when memories start to slide behind shut eyes. You'll see the lantern, you'll tread the corridor, and the house shall know you. I had believed that the ugliest horror lay not in the darkness or dark locations on earth, but in the ordinary, unassuming routine of common life. A behind an eye veiled by plain walls and family photos. All that had transpired was a difficult lesson for me, one which years later still lingers strong with me to this day. I bought the apartment on Hawthorne Street at age 28. It was not thrilling, There was a 2-bedroom in a run-down building whose beams creaked with each winter storm. But it was quiet, it was affordable, and best of all, it was my own. I rented alone, and for the first time in many, many years I enjoyed the bliss of no one nearby. At least, or so I assumed. The building itself was oddly constructed, with paper-thin ceilings and staircases going off in odd directions. The apartment immediately above mine was vacant when I rented it. My landlord explained that it had been vacant for nearly a year due to ongoing repairs. He didn't say another word, nor did I. The quiet upstairs was a kind of solace, until it did stop. And then, a couple of weeks or so afterwards, and I was settled in. Already I was beginning to listen for creaks and groans up in the flats block. Not really anything all that dramatic at first. A single shuffling to and fro, slamming door, muffled bump as something fell on the floor. Ordinary sounds, the kind that you get used to not listening for because that is what stuff sounds. I'd thought someone had rented, but I'd seen neither anything of movers nor moving vans. Oh, none of mine. And the noises became unpatter-like, horrendous so. The pattern was one of march back and forth and marching around with no conceivable pattern. They'd start in early morning hours, late as they were, about 2 a.m. or so, and continue for hours and hours. It wasn't natural either. It would sometimes go on for 3 consecutive nights and not show up for a week before starting again with even more energy. The pattern was always in the same small section of road, right above my bedroom. I rationally accounted for it initially. Perhaps my new neighbor worked at night or was one of those insomnia-plagued wakeful types. I even thought about standing up and going over there and attempting to head up to them, but something in me, some gut reaction, prevented it. I never did see them. Ever. Nobody went in or out of that unit during the day. There were never candles burning in the second-story windows at night. The mailbox was empty, silently collecting mail for untold thousands. I started asking the other tenants if the resident upstairs was in, and they would neither deny nor affirm having taken the flat to be empty. One of the older ladies downstairs pushed herself in beside me and said quietly that she could hear something too, but not a single word. They were no better than the night I woke up to hearing people whispering. It was discreet initially, a rustling of leaves from outside, yet unceasingly human. I drew in tight to listen in the dark, bored hard in bed, and recognized it was above the ceiling. Whispers were arrhythmic, no up and down with the words. Flat murmur only, as if one was reading something over and over. I could not sleep that evening. Whispering continued throughout the night, subsiding only as light started penetrating the blinds early in the morning. The air in my apartment grew stale for a couple of days. The air was thick, but with something within it that had a liquid consistency, but nothing unusual on the thermostat. I noticed plants that I had placed on the windowsill were drooping, although they were watered. I discovered my front door open one morning, although I had the routine of closing it when I retired to bed. And the dream, louder than I would have. I was in my own living room in it, but atop it, inverted, that is, a floor replica of my apartment, but inverted from elsewhere. The lights flickered. That same pacing hung over me, closer, commanding and insistent. And then suddenly a body appeared to fall out of the ceiling, not falling but descending on an unseen rope. It had absurdly long arms, its skeletal torso, and its head was a hollowed shell with an enormous slit for a mouth. It floated in front of me, making the same absurd sounds I had made when awake. Then it screamed, and it was like shards of glass in my head. I woke up struggling for air. My head was ringing and blood was dripping down from my nose. I had rationalized it in my mind as a night terror caused by stress. I knew what I was doing. I felt like I was being watched all the time that I was awake. I kept my distance from looking at myself in the bathroom mirror after I'd seen something like movement within its glass. My appliances weren't functioning. The TV would turn on to static at 3 a.m. My phone would receive blank texts, always at 3:17 a.m. Desperation forced me to sit with the landlord. I brought up the upstairs tenant and he shifted uncomfortably. His tone grew brusque, evasive. "No one's rented that flat," he reluctantly admitted, not even looking my way. "The previous person who was in it, something happened. It's not something that I have to be sharing with you." I pushed forward, persisted. He fought against it, then acquiesced. As for the guy who had rented the apartment, he was a loner, to himself. Advance rent in cash. 6 months or so prior to his disappearance, the tenants had reported things were occurring. Noises in the night, odors, and him mumbling along. Not screaming, but just low mumble, as reading from a book. Disappeared one day. Took everything with him. Inside locked door. "What did the police do?" He glared at me with twisted face and a strained look, half pitied me, half feared me. "They never caught him. Not a word. And the unit's been vacant ever since." Lasted a week. But, until now, the story of isn't finished. You see, the whispering persisted. It snuck into my new place quietly, as it has a tendency to do. I felt movement out of the corner of my eye, not my own specters. Same time, 3:17 a.m., jolting phone ringing, no calls, no texts. Occasionally I stay in bed with the horrific sensation of someone next to me sleeping, staring, waiting, and worst of all, I've started pacing out the past couple of weeks. I don't know why. I'll be walking the same distance down the hall, from toilet to bed without even realizing I've started. Hours can pass. Sometimes I wake up paralyzed, on the floor in bare feet with screwed up eyes looking up at the ceiling. And last night, I was speaking to myself, words I used to use. Tongue twisters that coil the tongue into knotted shapes. I've tried to keep it in, but the tape keeps returning curled up, used with static and those very same steps. I no longer worry about my conception of self. I no longer worry about the silence. Because I've started worrying about the man upstairs, never left the apartment complex. He just moved to a floor above to haunt, another ghost to pursue. And perhaps he no longer sleeps over me. Perhaps he sleeps within. It was on one late evening, after the sun had descended below the line of the horizon, that I first came to comprehend the terror of the terror through which I had so blindly lurched. The whispers had returned more commanding, but more insistent, more commanding. There was no longer any room for misunderstanding. The soft vibration of an eerie old house wasn't this. No, something infinitely worse had taken hold of me, something that would follow me whithersoever. I had begun to feel it close by. It was small at first, a quiver of a moment's fear that would burst over me like a nauseating shock. But the days went on, and it grew more stifling. I'd be rigid somewhere or other, staring blankly out into nothing, attempting to find meaning in the murmurs. those endless empty murmurs that rang within the confines of my own mind. There was no escape. Wherever I moved, darkness followed me, the blackness seeping further and further with every passing moment. I tried to reason myself out of it in the beginning. I tried to calm myself down by telling myself it was sensible, that I was just too angry, that all this psychic tension all this while had finally caught up with me at last. I knew better. I knew the truth. I'd brought something along with me when I'd run away from that terrible flat. The guy upstairs hadn't vanished. He'd just relocated his bad juju from one location to another, attached himself to me like a leech. The height was when one evening I wasn't resting. The crawling feeling of being watched was intolerable, having inaudible eyes focused on me all the time, watching every move, reading every thought. And then it began. The pacing up and down. I had considered it to be some fantasy at first. I had grown accustomed to the menacing thud of feet overhead, the sound which had been so careless, so fleeting. But this was bigger, bolder. The tramping no longer could somehow bleed over into the flat above. No, it echoed off me, a sinister, all-pervading sound that dogged me wherever I went. It was like the footsteps were running at me, circling, pushing themselves ahead. I was crouched in the center of my living room, panting, trying to take a breath. I was not alone. Whispering had moved to pacing now. Both of them, individually, were louder, until they coalesced into this riot of sound that echoed deep within bones. My eyes went wide around the room, futilely trying to find something, anything to explain what was taking place. Nothing. Just gagging silence, and that pounding of those feet, coming closer and closer. And then, like to answer that question that had haunted me, I saw it. I was staring at the darkened corridor when something caught the periphery of my vision. First, I saw only a blur, a fleeting movement from the edge of my eye. When I did, however, look aside, eyes screwed up. A man on the other side of the corridor, ebony face, far taller than the rest, impossibly so, and his posture stiff, as if he leant like a statue, slumped stiff into rigor. 2 long arms and frayed clothes, torn and dirty, as if they'd been ripped to pieces and stapled back together again in some half-hearted imitation. The air was heavy, heavy-laden, as if air itself had been polluted by being near him. I struggled to scream, to yell, but my voice refused to comply. My own body was frozen with fear, stiff, unyielding, immobile, stuck, unable to move, to run. The whispers grew more intense, faster, wilder, now interrupted by a rough, animal growl. My vision faded and I fell back onto the ground. The man did not stir, his form making an unusual, inhuman form on the ground that seemed to pull back into the walls of the room. That was when I realized. The man up there hadn't been a man. Not exactly. He'd been a cage. A holding place for something older, darker than any human could ever even imagine. It had come into the apartment, possibly even the complex, and when he vanished, he wasn't going anywhere. It simply moved into a new cage. Mine. The tap. The beat. The muttering. They weren't man sounds. These were the whispers of the presence that had rested behind me. The presence that had crawled in through the walls of that dirty apartment and now had me as well. I wasn't simply hearing the whispers of some forsaken presence. I was being stalked. I was the prey, and it was waiting for me to let down my guard, to slip. It was when I came to realize no one was going to save me. No escape, no rescue. Everything that I had ever gotten myself into, it was all for this now. And I was going to have to do all of it alone for what I had gotten myself into. I climbed up the stairs so eager to get out of my apartment complex. I dashed to the door and stretched out my hand in greeting, woefully unable to grasp the door as it stubbornly refused to budge. The door, that was merely an alleyway to the external world, had become a prison, shutting me within its walls. I screamed, pounding at the door, my throat dry and rough from fear that had taken hold of me. The beat was altered now to something else. A beat of the drums, the thudding in the chest, quicker, louder, madder and madder. The whispers now a sound like, something like a warning. Come closer. It is time soon. You are mine now. The voice, if ever I have heard a voice, tickled down my spine. Something never to be mine if human. Something from the center of madness. And then, with a repulsive crackle, the doors swung open. I dashed out into the hall panting, but there was no way out. Walls shut in upon me, air heavy with the smell of something ancient and evil. I looked back, attempting to flee down the stairs, but it was blocked. The hall was black, as though the building had melted into the world of dreams. The beat thudded on, more frantic, like a vice closing around me. I knew in the marrow of my bones that I was not going to get away. I was branded. The beast would not release me. It would haunt me everywhere, crouched in the darkness, lurking at the edges of perception, always just beyond reach, but never close enough to dislodge. And so I stand here today in this inaccessible cage rolling, just as the man above. I don't know if I am rolling or if the push that is propelling me in is stopping me. But travel nonetheless goes on, just as the wisps also don't stop. And amidst the slaps in them I hear its voice again, formless and boundless. You are mine now, forever. There is a place where silence is an absence of sound. It begins to breathe, to beat, to spread into the crevices of your mind and take up residence. I learned this the hard way. Others wonder why I no longer venture into the wild, why I left behind the thing that once defined me. I never give a simple answer, but the truth is simple, though it cannot be simply believed. What had happened to me in that woods did not have the quality of nightmare or close brush with death. It was more of an encounter with something that existed beyond time, something that happens outside of time, silently observing from the edge of the world, waiting for someone like us to come too close. I was in autumn 2021. I had just finished a freelance job that had taxed me and left me disillusioned. My initial impulse was to flee into the wilderness as I always did, to scrub clean my mind and shut myself away in solitude. But I did more in this case. I found a remote tract of woods in the Pacific Northwest, a place not on most maps but only described in a few frayed old forestry texts. That anonymity appealed to me. A place nearly forgotten? That was where I wished to go. I informed the trip to two friends, Mark and Ellis. We were not close, but we had previously hiked a couple of times. They were seasoned and dependable in the woods and not superstitious or nervous. That was what I required. We headed out in my SUV and stopped on a lonely fire road far out of any known trailhead. With our gear loaded, we hiked down a dry stream bed deeper into the woods for hours, struggling through thick pine scrub and fallen timber until we came to a secluded meadow ringed on all sides by huge trees. The leaves above were so thick they cast dappled sunlight in a sulky greenish glow, as if we had stepped into a dream, or something else. We arrived around late afternoon. No sign of life, no humanity, no birds either. That should have been the big red flag, but we were too deep into naked beauty of the scenery. The first night was and became silent, except for an absolute stillness that nearly consumed even our own noises. The fire cracked as it normally would, though its voice seemed somehow suppressed, as if it had been stifled by an invisible hand. The second night was when Ellis first saw it. We had just finished dinner. The fire was low and it made long shadows behind the trees. We were sitting in a triangular formation around it, all of us sitting quietly listening to the woods. Ellis stiffened suddenly. I saw his face turn white. He didn't speak out but just stared into the woods. Then in a whisper barely louder than a breath, he murmured that there was someone, something, standing at the back of the pine some 40 feet away. Standing. Staring. Mark and I lingered there, but nothing. No movement. No flicker of eyes in the dark. Only massive trunks and swaying needles. "You're tired," I told him. "It's probably a tree." He said nothing. Simply turned and went to his tent, but first muttering something I couldn't quite catch. something about its eyes not being right. I slept fitfully that night. The cold permeated, colder than it should have been this early in autumn, and at 2 in the morning I was awakened by the sound of scraping. I initially thought it was some creature digging around in the bushes, but too frequent, slow, extended, like something tracing a conscious big loop around our tents, moving a hand or claw or something across the nylon surface. I felt it pass by me, then pause, then again, but in another location. It wasn't random. It was sensing. I kept my knife in my sleeping bag and waited. I didn't scream. I didn't move. The air was thick, heavy, electrified with some secret energy. The noise ceased at last, but sleep never arrived. Well before the dawn, Mark vanished. His tent remained untouched, locked from within, his boots drawn up in line beside it, his gear still folded carefully. But the man himself vanished, as if melted on contact. Panic did not set in at first. We hollered his name for the first hours, pacing around the edge, checking for indications. There were none. No indication of a fight either. The pine needles weren't ruffled. It was like the woods swallowed him up. Ellis began to fall apart. His voice trembled when he spoke. His hands trembled. I tried to be brave, saying that Mark was probably lost when he stopped to rest, and we would find him when the sun was high. But I knew that something was off about this place. The trees leaned too close together, the air too quiet. Even the insects had vanished. We hollered all day, yelled our heads off. Mark never replied. The trees dampened our voices. Nightfall, and we were debating going. But to force a way through dense woods in the dark was too dangerous. Yeah, I thought that at least. We did have headlamps, but the forest sucked up light like a sponge, so we stayed around another night. That evening, we built the fire larger than normal, a half-hearted attempt at whatever we could sense creeping in, but regardless of how much kindling we added to it, the fire had trouble, as if something was pulling the warmth out. Ellis sat in front of the fire for several minutes. He did not speak, did not bat his lids. For a moment I knew he was repeating something, a repetition of sounds I couldn't hear. Eventually he got up. He stared at me, no, through me, and walked off into the woods. I ran to stop him, but fear or stiffness or instinct or something kept me rooted where I was. He crossed over into darkness and was lost from sight across the edge of light. I stood waiting. Minutes passed, then an hour. He came back not. I stood there alone. I didn't sleep, not even for short stretches. I sat with my back to the fire, knife tight in my fingers, staring into the woods. Now and again I caught a movement in the thicket, but it never drew any closer, only circled, like a wolf waiting for its victim to drop. The fire went out at midnight. No wind, no rain, just out. And then the scratching began again. But this time, from above, the top flap of the tent collapsed. Something heavy, inching its way along it, testing the stitching. I could hear breathing, low and rhythmic and hollow, like air moving through a cave. My fingers trembled. The knife would not be of use. I shut my eyes, not wanting to live, but to be finished with it soon. But there was nothing. Finally, the weight was lifted. The sound stopped. When morning came, I crawled out of the tent. Ellis was missing, as was Mark. His pack and boots remained behind, but something or someone had left something for me. A spiral of bones, not animal skeletons, human, clean, just so neatly spread out in the center of the clearing. I fled. No rations, no compass. I trudged into the sunrise, battling through the scrub like a lunatic. Each branch that struck me stung like a claw. Each shadow seemed to spring to life. I did not stop, not ever, until I hit the fire road once more. Hours later, I lost consciousness. One of the rangers stumbled upon me, confused and wounded. I was evacuated, questioned by authorities, and then released. They mobilized search parties. Dogs, unmanned aerial vehicles. None came back, not even our camp. It was like it never occurred. The news never reached the attention of the news. It got lost among bureaucratic nonsense and red tape. Accidental disappearance. Wildlife interference. I fell behind on the follow-up on the investigation after some time. The truth never departed. I no longer climb, I no longer camp, I no longer hike into woods. Sometimes in weakness I ask myself if I made it all up. But then I hear it again. The scratching, the breathing, somewhere in sleep or in spaces between silence and sound. And I recall, some things aren't to be gone to. Some things are old. Older than memory. Olderer than time. And they don't permit intrusives. I talked myself into thinking I'd escaped, that I'd broken the forest's grip. But as the weeks passed, I caught myself wondering otherwise. Not even the nightmares, those awful recurring flashbacks to Mark and Ellis standing in the trees, statuesque, still, black, sunken eyes, unblinking, calling to me silently. Something more sinister, more intimate. My apartment began to feel off. It felt like the geometry was warped, faintly distorted in a manner I couldn't quite verbalize. I described that I'd awaken at night and find curtains drawn where I was sure I had opened them. Furniture was only minimally out of place. Pine-scented needles streamed through closed windows. It was not paranoia. My front door remained locked. I never left my windows open. And yet somehow the outside intruded. I began to keep all of the lights burning at night. I salt-lined my apartment out of desperation rather than faith. I slept, sleeping, under the influence of sleeping pills to keep dreams away from me. But the true horror wasn't in sleep. It was in the world of wakefulness. One evening, weeks since I'd come back, I was alone in my kitchen, surrounded by the hum of all the lights on the estate, when I heard it again. That scraping, low and deliberate, not loud, but determined. It was in the hall. I got up, every hair on my body standing on end. I clutched a kitchen knife in my hand so hard that my hand cramped. I approached the sound slowly, step by grudging step, knowing before I reached the hall that I would find nothing there. And I didn't, except for the row of pine needles. They ran from my front door to the hall mirror. Same spiral I had seen in the woods, but now broken, ended, as if whatever was making them had been stopped in their making. I fled the apartment that night. I stole nothing. I simply walked out of the cold, barren street and left it all behind. I paid in cash for a rundown motel room blocks away and spent the entire night sitting, watching the door. I swore I'd never return home again. And I didn't. But it didn't matter. Because some things follow you. Some things have no place or space. I changed numbers, jobs, even moved to another state. But the signs continued. Trees would appear outside my windows in cities where no trees should be. I'd smell fire smoke in the shower only to emerge and find nothing. I'd hear branches creaking, though there was no wind. And once, just once, I woke up in bed to find pine needles inside my mouth. The doctors called it trauma, a survivor's hallucination complex. Told me that I'd invented fantasies of memory to insulate myself from blame. That Ellis and Mark were missing but presumed lost to exposure, and that I'd seen it, that I'd shattered only. But they didn't see what I saw. They didn't feel what I felt. They didn't understand what crept in them woods. I ultimately gave up on trying to make it make sense. I fell off everyone's radar. Became a ghost of my own existence. Worked nights, lived in movement, and for a time it did mend, like scabbing over an injury. Life was again still. Until last week, I discovered something behind the building where I now work. Behind the back door, just a few feet in, a tent. It had not been stolen. It had simply been abandoned, clean, intact. My tent. The same make, the same color. And beside it, 2 boots lying side by side in lined up alignment. Ellis's boots. I walked out on the job right there and left the city the next day. But I realized then what I had attempted to deny all those years. It had left its mark. That forest, that thing within it. It hadn't let me go. It had only waited, and it was getting closer. There's a theory I've since come across, a legend buried in obscure folklore from Pacific tribes long displaced from those woods. They speak of a spirit called the Talmaru, not a creature, not a ghost, but a will, a force, older than man, not evil, not good, only hungry. It watches those who creep too close. It kills not at once. It waits, wrapping itself around their heads. It causes them to see things, question things, and then, when they are hollow within, it takes them, body, soul, and memory, in the earth. Some vanish in the blink of an eye. Some, like myself, are kept. Why? I do not know. Perhaps as bait, perhaps as threat. But this I know. When the fire burns out, when the ground lies still, when the last spark sputters to embers, it will stay. And if you ever must ride by yourself through a forest where even the birds will be still, leave. No photograph is worth it. No moment is worth it. Because there are places in this world where man doesn't belong. And sometimes, when you do, you never really come back. Vacations need to be a break, a brief forsaking of ritual, in which time moves at a snail's pace and the noise of life finally abates. That was what I sought when I booked a remote island resort in the Philippines' southernmost point. I was exhausted with screens, ritual, and city lights, and I longed for something low-tech, something pure. The brochure I had discovered referred to the island as a secret gem, an off-the-grid island with a few native families residing there and where cell phone signal, Wi-Fi, and all digital distractions did not extend. I boarded a chartered boat, a creaking boat manned by a man with vacant eyes who barely noticed I was aboard. He spoke to me once as he piloted the boat towards the fog shape of the island. "You'll be off by the third night," he growled, staring at the distant shore. I knew it had to be a mistranslation or a village legend. I smiled and nodded and watched the boat fade into what I hoped was a tranquil one. The island greeted me with deafening silence, the kind that hums at the base of your skin and makes you aware of your loneliness. The wind was abnormally still. Trees were giant statues, not a leaf trembling against sea breeze. No chirping birds, no insects. Only the empty smacking of waves and the grinding sand beneath my feet. The accommodation was basic, a wooden hut on the edge of a dense jungle where the jungle covered the floor. It was tidy inside but Spartan. No electricity. There was one oil lamp on a wooden bench and a hard, dry bed. But it had the essentials in their most basic form, and that is what I wanted. The first night passed without incident. I was mesmerized by the sun setting, watching as red light crept across the sea. I went to bed early, enticed by waves' rhythm, but the first crack came in that sleep. I awoke at precisely 2:13 a.m. My body tightened from a shiver of cold, although the air was tropical, as if some sort of intangible vice had clamped down on it. The lantern had gone out. Black night. But not the cold was disturbing me. The waves stopped. I pulled out my ears, caught my breath, and waited, praying to hear some sign. But there was nothing. No gentle rustle of wind through leaves. Nothing. Just the heavy stillness which troubled my mind. I attempted to rationalize it. Perhaps my ears had merely gotten used to it, or perhaps I'd slept past the middle of some kind of bizarre break in the rhythm of nature. Either, though, I couldn't sleep. I'd lie motionless in bed until daylight crept into the window. The second day didn't sit right, but I couldn't quite place it. The trees had looked closer than yesterday, leaning inward toward the cabin. I knew the trail to the beach had narrowed. I strolled along the beach, looking for something to trigger my memory, but it seemed as though the island itself had been nudged a little overnight, like a house in which furniture has been subtly rearranged. Then, in conducting my internal research, I came across something that made me nauseous to loathing. A half-mile or so from the cabin and rather well hidden among some bushes, I discovered a group of wooden statuettes. The coarsely hacked bodies, wrapped in string and daubed with something dark. Dried blood or darkening paint, maybe. All of them in a circle, blank faces turned back toward the center where a pyramid of burned stones stood like an altar. I crept in quietly, and then I heard it. A harsh, abrupt rustling. I did not stir. It returned. Leaves were rustling behind me. I turned around, hoping to get a glimpse of an animal, but there was nothing there. I moved back from the effigies, rushing, but as I moved, an odd certainty began to seep its way into my mind. I was being watched. I had kindled the lantern sooner than I wanted and shut cabin doors, but I understood it would be of no use to secure whatever was on this island. I did not sleep. I lay in bed, the light of the lantern flickering pathetically, eyes scanning every fluttering and moving shadow. At 2:13 a.m., the lantern died, not dimmed, not wavered. The lantern extinguished, with a suddenness as though smothered by unseen fingers. And once more, silence, the waves, absent, the insects, absent, leaving nothing but the boom of my own panting breathing, but accompanying this another thing, something so gentle that it would have been imagined from off my head, but I knew it was not. Whispering, quiet, murmurous, along the outer wall of the cabin. I didn't move. My whole body was locked into place. I was sitting with clenched fists up in the blankets and couldn't even blink. The whisper curled around the cabin once, slowly, with deliberation, and then stopped. Something scraped against the door, though, not again and again, not like a dog. It was on purpose, almost. Polite. One scratch, then the second, like whatever it was on the other side was trying to imitate human movements, but without breath. I gritted my eyes shut. Minutes could have gone by, or hours. Time had fractured. I remember only that at last the whispering and scratching ceased. I remained stiff until light finally permeated at last through the wooden boards. I might have escaped then. The boat would come back the following morning, but I knew, on an airplane past sanity, that I wouldn't survive till the next evening. I packed my equipment and crossed to the opposite shore of the island to find out if I could discover a fishing vessel or a native people. But the island did not follow natural geography anymore. The streets I'd walked the day before were erased. Old trails were blocked by trees. Effigies were where they hadn't been before. More of them now. They'd doubled, if not tripled, in quantity. And the farther I traveled, the more I saw a twisted pattern. The effigies were all turned toward me, always. Regardless of the way I skirted around and approached it from a different perspective, their empty skulls glared. I screamed into the forest, though I do not know why. The island absorbed the sound like a vacuum. That evening, I had returned to the cabin, grudgingly though, but by some unseen pull. Wherever I went, there I was, as if the island were shrinking in on itself. I did not ignite the lantern that night. There was no need. I huddled in the corner, knees to chest, as 2:13 tolled out with nightmare precision. The darkness was thick as ever before, rich, stifling, as if the air itself had soured to blackness. And then it arrived. Not through the door, not through any bodily point of entry. It simply arrived, there in the room like an angry ball of evil. I didn't see it, but I felt it. A mind, an old hatred that loomed over me like the sky itself had come crashing down. My mind froze. My breathing froze. And then my mind started to break, not metaphorically. I felt it, a swing of an axe chopping off my consciousness, splitting self from remembrance. Flash images flashed before me. My childhood house, my mother's face, then blackout, then my funeral. It addressed me, not in my ear, but in my very heart. An old language, older than words, not made of words, but made of pain, of memory, of feeling. Spoke a truth that I couldn't yet explain, something greater than knowing, something that existed outside our being, that couldn't be had in any form. And it insisted that I carry it, to carry it back to the mainland with me, to be its vessel. I don't know the end of that evening. Only waking up at sunrise on the beach, the boat lying quietly at the water's edge. The hollow-eyed man said not a word when I climbed aboard. I never asked him why he'd gotten there early. I never asked him how he'd known that I was to depart. As the boat bore me away, I looked back once. The island vanished. Nothing but water and mist. When I returned to the mainland, I tried to find where I was. It was not on any map. The company I had booked with had no memory of my purchase. My emails were erased. My bank did not register a withdrawal, as if the island had never been, and perhaps it hadn't. But every night since, at 2:13 a.m., the silence comes back. The surf is still, and the whispering begins. But now I am no longer on the island. So it went with me. It came in. And I fear one day, it will also wish to leave. And now wherever I go, it goes along. Another invisible traveler written on my heart. Cities, hotels, streets full of people, it matters not. At 2:13 a.m. the world is still quiet. Waves, even miles from the sea, come to a halt, and the whispers begin, no longer beyond my window but within my head. I no longer sleep. I no longer dream. I merely wait, rotting from the inside out. It no longer needs the island. Now I am the island. A corrupted vessel for something ancient and ravenous. And soon it will have power through me. When it does, let the world hear, for I will not. There is something unsettling about the road at night. Without sunlight, it's another place. Quieter, darker, and somehow more alive in ways that can't be explained. I've driven at night thousands of times, but one night, in early winter 2017, I found there's a line between habit and fear, and I'd unknowingly crossed it. I was driving home from a business convention in a nearby city, a 4-hour drive. The convention had lasted longer than I had anticipated, and by the time I actually left in the car, the sky had already started to pale blue, then indigo, before growing dark again. I was not concerned. A familiar drive along the highway, the car in top working condition, and the roads themselves emptiness spick and span at that late night. I liked the silence, or at least I thought. I remember observing the yellow line dividers converge into each other as the automobile cut through the emptiness. The exterior had been simplified into a cold blur of trees and darkness, punctuated by the short flash of oncoming street signs. No other vehicles, no headlights, no taillights, nothing but me and the smooth rumble of the engine, getting louder with each thing that dissolved. At about an hour and a quarter into the journey, the temperature dropped. Frost formed at the perimeter of the windshield, spreading in thread-like minute veins like a malignant growth. The automotive heating system malfunctioned for a second before stabilizing. The single aberration aside, I attributed it to mechanical stress. But the anguish did not subside. It was when I saw it, the first clue. A little green detour sign on the roadside, half buried in mud and ice. It read, "Detour ahead, Route 161. I pulled off the road, perplexed. No roadwork had been announced on traffic sites that day. And yet here I stood in front of the barrier, orange cones and a work sign blocking my path. It was impossible. My only option was to take the narrow, dimly lit side street to the right, Route 161. The name didn't sound right. I glanced over at the phone attached to the dashboard, but the signal was gone. No signal, no map. I had a direction and a decision. Not wishing to be stuck on an empty road, I turned. As soon as I got onto Route 161, something didn't feel right. The highway was a thin ribbon, bordered by woods on either side. The trees were impossibly tall, leaves intertwining overhead in a canopy like the fingers of death, suffocating the moonlight. My headlights were the sole illumination, which picked up glints of road and nothing else after that. Even the air was strange, slightly stagnant, heavy, faintly metallic. All my hair began to hiss warnings. That empty, bottomless kind of fear that has its roots in some dank recess of the human mind. But I still forced ahead, bent to the task, refusing to return for nothing. Minutes passed and lengthened to seeming infinity. The further I forced ahead, the more bizarre everything was. I witnessed odd things. The trees, one, were too tidy. They all leaned at the same angle, curving onto the road, their bark scarred by black blotches that had nearly blackened. I looked past one place where a car had stopped off the road, a rusty van with open doors, no one in evidence. I slowed, considering pulling over and helping, but something about it felt contrived, staged, as though bait in disguise as ill fortune. I sped up instead, and the animals started to show up, not of the breathing variety. Corpses. They were scattered along the road haphazardly. Raccoons, deer, even birds, dead and gruesomely twisted. Some lay fresh, others long decomposed to unrecognizability. But what was most disconcerting to me was where they were. All the bodies were in the very middle of the road, spaced by the same gaps evenly, as if put there on purpose. My gut twisted in silent horror. I was amazed at its sanity. Of course this wasn't normal. Of course a road like this one would be advertised, but I had no signal, no sat-nav, and now, no sense. I drove on, more and more desperate to see an exit, a roundabout. Anything but just keep going along the same godforsaken bit. It was then that I saw the signs. They began arriving alone. Small white boards nailed to trees, flashing briefly in the headlights. Written on them, in black ink or paint, one more ominous than the previous. Do not look in the rearview mirror. He watches when you blink. Do not stop the car, whatever you hear. Initially, I had them on dumb jokes, perhaps alphabetically by restless teens. But the further I drove, the more words wrote themselves onto my mind. I could sense the presence of somebody, no, something, standing right behind me. Invisible, unseen but perceived. Like something was sitting in the back seat, watching silently. I fought the temptation to look at the mirror. The urge became all-consuming. When at last I did perish, I looked a little farther up, and at nothing. Nothing but the silhouette of the rear seat, shadowed, empty. But my heart was crashing against my chest with a pressure that really hurt. Because at that second, for the briefest infinitesimal of seconds, the vehicle was heavier. The air chilled, and I heard it, breathing. It was from behind, slow, raspy, deliberate. Not man, almost. The voice of whatever was imitating man, whatever was imitating the voice of life. I clenched the wheel in front of me, knuckles knotted, attempting to talk myself out of it being an illusion, a hallucination of loneliness and fear. Then it laughed, a low guttural laugh, unshaken. The kind of sound that slices through reason and devours the very fabric. I ground my foot onto the accelerator. The vehicle sprang ahead, tires squealing, engine bellowing in protest. My head spun into anarchy, assailed by the suffocating awareness that something monstrous was now inside the car. I would not glance. I would not halt. The highway ahead of me melted into a seemingly endless tube of black and gray, eyelids slicing, head splitting, and all at once, it was finished. The tension released, air a bit more balmy, the forest relaxing its grip on the road, discomfort washed away like receding tide. I braked the car, my trembling hands. Ahead, I saw an intersection, a green highway sign. Highway 22, 3 miles. I breathed in relief and turned into the connecting road with cautious hope. But as I drove on, something was nagging in my mind. Something sinister. I hadn't blinked for several minutes. The road, although new, was too familiar, and I saw the sign again. Don't look in the rearview mirror. It had been stuck on another tree, more along. I knew that I wasn't out. I was still inside, it whatever that thing was. A loop, a trap, an area meant to mimic getaway, but meant only to extract torture. And worse, I also saw something which I hadn't yet seen. The dashboard clock. It read 1:06 a.m. It was 1:06 because I'd gotten on Route 161. The time had not been changed, not by any stretch of the word. I wasn't in the same place anymore. Panic lifted its head, rager fire than ever before. I shouted, not because of fear, but because I wouldn't shut up, and pulled the car to the shoulder, slapping on the brakes. The car slid into a halt. There was a silence. Nothing but the steady thrum of my own heartbeat in my ears. I braved shifting, turning reluctantly back toward the rear seat. No one there. And I saw I had somehow transgressed the law of the sign. I had caused the car to stop. Something pierced, a mutter at first, as it sliced through a thickness of leaves, then bitter, rhythmic, footsteps. They emerged from behind the car, closer, chunky, measured. I locked the doors. The feet circled the car once, then again, and then came to a stop at the driver's window. I was paralyzed, staring straight ahead, too scared to breathe. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed the presence of a figure, a thin, skeletal one with its face covered in shadow. It reached and pressed something against the window, not its face, its hand, but not a human hand. It had too many fingers. I closed my eyes. When I opened them, the form was lost. I turned the key. The car groaned, bucked, then coughed into life. I drove. I never stopped. Not when I drove by the signs a second time. Not when I drove over the same corpses. Not even when the trees began to bleed. I drove until light crept onto the horizon. And then I saw another exit. No directions. No detours. Just that exact same road that I used to drive down every day to go to work. The clock turned itself back. It read 4:53 a.m. I wandered home in a daze, operated the car, and unlocked the door into the house without uttering a word. I fell onto the couch and sat there staring up at the ceiling for hours. I didn't say anything to anyone. Until today, I don't know what happened. If it was somewhere, if it was a dream, if anything else. But I do know one thing. Every night since then, I see someone in the mirror, not always clear, occasionally just a figure, but present, waiting. And sometimes when I drive home late at night and the clock strikes 1:06, my GPS goes dark, and I see a sign. Detour ahead, Route 161. I started to steer clear of driving at night altogether. I rearranged my routine for months so I'd never be driving down a remote road at night. And yet the vision persisted, haunting like a splinter wedged too deep to be removed. But time dulls even the keenest fears, and I was soon convincing myself that it was a hallucination, a daytime nightmare induced by sleep deprivation, until a fortnight ago, my nephew's wedding, something I could not do without. Rejoicing ran late into the night, and when I utilized the excuse and made the return trip, it was nearly 1 a.m. I traveled on highways, clinging to points of reference, holding firmly at the time, resisting each temptation to allow thoughts to wander. But as the minutes ticked by and the hour was late, the GPS started to flash. Static. And then nothing. And then the chill. It flowed into the car like a wave of ice, uninvited and unseemly. My breath fogged the glass, and before I could react, the road signs began to vanish. The mile markers at first, then the exit signs. One by one, the world stripped off, and what remained was the yellow dividers behind, familiar, infinite, condemnatory. And then I saw it once more. Detour ahead, Route 161. No orange cones this time, no roadblocks. The road simply shifted. A curve that wasn't there before curved to the right, dropping into the blackness. My stiff and cold fingers grumbled not. I turned. The trees closed in around me house like old friends. All of it in an instant once more. The flat woods, dead things on the highway, signs. Different this time. Less warning, more promise. Don't touch. He is patient. You brought him back. Now get home the rest of the way. The car coasted to a halt. The accelerator had died. The steering wheel spun without friction, turning me. And the dashboard lights then disappeared, and the radio crackled on. A voice. Not static. Not a broadcast. Mine, speaking the words I had spoken in fear that first night. It hung on a question. How long can you outrun something that is inside of you? The mirror darkened, and I could see something moving in it. No longer a dark shape in the back seat, but a faceless clone in the front seat beside me. A faceless clone. Glaring, smiling. I don't know how the night ended. I woke up in my garage, engine dead, sweat on my shirt. The clock in the house read 4:53 a.m., just like before. Now, however, every mirror reflects something other than my face. Every reflection is a tenth of a second behind. Every evening I can hear tires eating up gravel in the drive without a car arriving. And in the dreams, I am driving on a road that stretches interminably, lined with corpses yelling my name. I think I never made it off Route 161. I think I brought it home. And worst of all, I fear the next time I won't wake up. There are some moments in life that hang suspended in time, unaltered by the ravages of years, so unnatural or so foreign that they cannot be placed among common memories. What I am about to say is not a family legend passed down through generations or a twisted memory of childhood fears. It's something that I keep with me, something that terrifies the silence, haunts the border of consciousness, and still tints the margins of rationality. It was 8 years ago, yet I remember it better than the face of someone whom I loved. I was a post-grad lit student at the time, and I'd started a fellowship at an ancient but compact university in North England. The university was famous for its age, for ivy-covered walls, and for the staggering dorms that had been remodeled from pre-war government buildings which had stood empty since the war, and medieval manors restored to their former glory. My assigned dorm was a Victorian building called Eastbrook Hall, a massive building with slant stairways, lopsided floors, and windows that would not open more than an inch. It was the kind of building in which silence was wicked. I was allocated the third floor, though it didn't exist on the formal blueprints of the building. It was unofficially referred to among students as the attic, and had been sealed off for more than a decade after a roof collapse that was never made good. For some reason or other that no one could grasp, it had somehow just been declared safe again. I was informed that I would be the sole occupant to reside on that floor. When I entered for the first time, I noticed it was strange that the hall lights wouldn't function well. The bulbs dimmed a bit before they gave into darkness, and despite my having reported it, they never addressed the problem. The floor consisted of 6 doors, 3 on either side of the thin corridor, but one room that was not locked was mine. The others were bolted shut or had rusted locks that had not been opened in decades. My own room, in a dramatic contrast to the hallway, was spotless. It obviously had been redone recently. The wooden floors had been buffed, the windows insulated with new material, and the shelves and desk were new. Something in the room was not quite right, not wrong, but artificially sterile, as if an attempt had been made to remove its history, not preserve it. There was no dust, no wood smell or age, only a strangling feeling of sterility, as if the room had been picked up instead of lived in. The first week was uneventful. I did my time studying and researching, and while the flicker of the hall lights was annoying, I ignored them. But every night, there would be this feeling that would settle over the third floor. No sound, no presence really, but a dislocation. A feeling that the building itself moved a fraction of an inch, like a ship on some underwater current. On the 7th night, I woke at 3:11 a.m. to activity. Not the scrape of footsteps or the moan of wood, but something that would not categorize. Tugging noise, gentle and repeated, like something heavy was being dragged down the floor of the corridor. I lay immobile in bed, listening. 37 seconds, and it stopped just beyond my door. I stood there, my breath stuck in my throat, but no knock, no whisper, no sound of fleeing, only silence. When I finally mustered up the nerve to peek into the hallway, I saw nothing. The hall was vacant. I ran my hand over the other room's door handles, all still locked, all cold to the touch. Subsequently, sleep avoided me. Each night at exactly 3:11 a.m., the dragging recurred, close, sometimes far away. I thought of leaving the door ajar one night, motivated by a sick curiosity to see what it was. But fear of what I would see, what I would confess, was greater. The 12th night was different. I awoke to a heavy weight, but not from sound. I awoke from a suffocating presence in the room. My body would not stir initially, yet my limbs were in hidden bondage. I was able to shift my eyes alone, and as I rolled them towards the other side of the room, I noticed something indescribable, a figure, or lack of one. It had no form or texture but the incontestable sensation of being watched. It persisted there for hours. I did not sleep. By day, I explained it away. Sleep paralysis, I said to myself. A classic case. But reason is no match for resolve, and the attacks only grew more real. My books would rearrange themselves on the shelves, first small, then intentional. The lights in my bedroom would turn on when I turned them off. The faucet would run for hours, even when I closed it tightly. Things would shift when no one was present, tending back to their place every time I walked around, as if to indicate cunning instead of mistake. On the 21st day, I came across something that broke my already weak nerves. While getting an extra blanket from the closet, I struck a knocked-open section on the floor behind the carpet. There had been a shallow hollow carved out of the wood, and inside it was a cloth-wrapped package. It contained 4 things: an old key, a smashed photograph of a young woman with her eyes scratched out, a torn page of a journal, and a rusty watch with the initials A.T. etched into it. The journal page was grimy, hardly legible, but a few sentences had made it through. He looks from the walls. He knows I see him. If I leave, he will leave too. But if I remain, that was all. The ink seeped into nothing. I had taken the objects and locked them in my desk drawer. In the middle of the night, the room cooled to nearly freezing. No reason. No breakdown of the building's boiler. Just cold, unnatural and biting. At 3:11 a.m. on the dot, the dragging recurred, louder, more insistent, and then the knock. Not on my door, but on the door next to mine, one that had been closed up since I'd been there. The knock was deliberate, slow. 3 knocks, then nothing. The next day, I tried to open the door. It was still locked. I used the key I'd discovered in the floorboard, and to my amazement, it opened. The door creaked open into blackness. No windows. No furniture, just a single chair in the middle of the room, and the thick smell of mildew and decay. The walls were smeared with something, not mold but writing, scrawled on the surface with what appeared to be nails or claws. Repeated again and again, a message. We are never alone. We are never alone. We are never alone. Against the wall of the room was a stack of moldy blankets. Amidst them, I discovered something that would haunt my mind for the next several years, a human jawbone, dry and brittle. I told the university, but within a day the 3rd floor was evacuated. I was moved to a brand new dorm on campus for no reason. It spread fast. They told me a student had gone missing in the 1970s. Others told me a professor had been holding seances in the attic. The university wrote it off, though. The jawbone disappeared. So did the picture and bracelet I'd left in my desk drawer. When I went back weeks later to pick up a few remaining belongings, the 3rd floor had again been welded shut, locked from the outside, as if to make sure that whatever it was that lived inside would never be loose. But I know better, because it followed me. Since then, I've been moving from city to city, from continent to continent. But each year, on the anniversary of my first night in Eastbrook Hall, at 3:11 a.m., I wake up to the creaking noise, sometimes in the hallway, sometimes just outside my window. The noise no longer scares me. What scares me now is knowing that whatever it is, whatever I had disturbed, has patience. It waits, it observes, and one day it will no longer knock. It will just arrive. I attempted to dissuade myself from attempting to inform myself that it was residual trauma, something imprinted onto my mind from the months I spent residing in the damned house. But some way I realized that this was a bit more than a psychological wound. The cycle was too precise. Every year, consistently, the homecoming was like before. 3:11 a.m., scraping noises, silent. Wherever I was, a flat in Manchester, a research residence in Prague, or a hotel in New York. It did not matter, it always found me. And never did get too out of control. It merely reminded me I had been tagged. 2 years following the accident, I tried to talk to an old university staff member who was then a night custodian during the renovation of Eastbrook Hall. I met him through an alumni network of individuals. He was reserved at first, but when I said the words "third floor," his reserve was loaded with more than words. He uttered only these: there wasn't a third floor. Not officially, at least. They closed it off after a girl went missing in '78. Abigail, that's what she was called. Room 3F6. Said she was insane. Began scratching words onto walls. Next night, gone. Police recovered her bracelet, but no body. No sign of trauma of any sort. Just the room. That, still closed off to this day. Or, at least it was. I inquired of him what happened to the staff afterwards. He told me that the floor was closed down and the staff were not allowed in. The man stopped talking and hung up. That night, the routine was broken. For the first time, I did not hear the dragging at 3:11 a.m. Rather, I woke up to discover my door literally shut up the previous night, slipping off the hinges. The outside air was still, but charged, like pre-lightning air that shatters the skylines. I walked out, not to the hall of my present home, but to the hall of Eastbrook Hall, which remained unchanged, unmoved by time. 6 doors, twirling light bulbs, stinking carpet, and room 3F6 in the rear. The one I had already opened, the one I had already desecrated. I attempted to turn back, to go back into that which I had departed. But now there was no going behind. Only emptiness that was a vacuum. Something deeper than curiosity, penance maybe, called me to room 3F6. The door creaked open before I could put my hand on it. The chair remained in the middle of the room. The jawbone did not manifest. Instead, stood the figure, no longer shapeless, no longer in darkness. It was not grotesque to look at. It did not have grotesque defects, no bloodied limbs or devil's face. That would have been bearable, categorizable, I suppose. But what I saw was not identity. A humanoid shell with nothing where the face ought to be, only stretched white skin, faintly pulsing as if it breathed. I couldn't move. My body was betraying me. And then it started speaking, not in words, but in thoughts, seeping into the cracks of my mind like black ink in clear water. You opened the door. What was never meant for ears you heard, and what was hidden you saw. And now you are the door. The shape did not shift, and yet it seemed to move closer until shadow behind it enveloped all. I did not scream. I could not. It entered me not with force, but with permanence, like fog seeps into an empty room. And then I woke up, in my bed, in my present home. The lights were on. The door was shut, but something was amiss. I got up and approached the mirror. My face stared back at me, unchanged but strange. Behind my eyes there was calmness. Not peaceful, but something colder, as if part of me had ceased to be. Human. From that day on, the dragging stopped. So did the visitations. But I was not relieved, for something had changed. A bargain had been struck. And with the passing of the years, I became aware of the effects. I was unable to dream. The unmannered quiet that preceded me into every room. The scorching of lights wherever I trod. Animals shunned me. People froze in my presence. Other people gazed at me with an uncertainty they could not define. I was a student of folkloric traditions, occult historical events, and lost architecture. Not because I liked it, but because I have to be. I needed to know what I had once been, what I had caressed, and what now rested in my eyes. The results were disjointed. Hypotheses, not conclusions. But there was a trend. Some structures constructed over abandoned tracks. Locations where the tissue between perception and reality had grown thin. Eastbrook Hall was one of them. A nexus. Not haunted by a specter, but by something much older. Something seeking a host. By opening that door, I had not revealed a secret. I had performed a ritual. I went back to Eastbrook one final time. I had to see it, to reaffirm what I already suspected. The building was condemned, closed, broken windows, nature retaking the building. But the third floor, it remained untouched, not eroded, not decaying, saved, as if guarded. I broke in at nightfall, went up the stairs that are no longer there, and when I hit the third floor, I found not ruin, but the same corridor that I'd known. Flickering light bulbs still present, 6 doors still present. My room was unmolested, so was room 3F6. But this time, every other door was open. In all of them, I discovered pieces, shoes, hairbrushes, pages torn from diaries, names, photos, various people, all very much dead. And I realized I wasn't the first, neither was I the last. There had always been a door, there had always been someone to open it. And now that is my job, the one who remembers, the one who waits. So when you're home alone at night and candles burn for no apparent reason, when the corridor seems longer than it ever seemed, when the clock reads 3:11 a.m. and something moves just outside your line of vision, don't ask yourself, what is it? But who opened the door? And did they close it behind them? Because if they didn't, it's already inside. I was a rational, reasonable person. I had no room in my life for superstition or illogical fear. But there are some moments in life that show even the greatest faith in reason. It is the things which I am going to tell you which cannot be explained. And though I have tried to brush them aside so many times, they still disturb me, carved into my mind, like a persistent nightmare. It started on a night of peace, the kind of night where later it feels so normal you just want to turn the clock back and get up and do something different and alter the course of things. I had just moved into a small house on the edge of town. The house itself was nice but old. One creaking floorboard and whiff of wood odor did little more than make it charming. It was a peaceful place, isolated from the sounds and din of city life. It would be the perfect refuge, a place to escape from the stresses of everyday living. I had only just been there for weeks and had yet to get into my new rhythm. The house was sometimes quiet, but never mindlessly so. It was just quiet, and I liked the quiet. But something was not quite right in the house, a sensation that slipped through my fingers. It felt as if the walls contained a message that was never to be spoken. I dismissed such a thing as paranoia, the result of my frantic mind. That night, alone in the living room, the quiet was more oppressive than ever. I was reading when I first heard the first noise, a soft thud upstairs. It was muffled, but loud enough to be heard. I initially thought it was the house settling, the way old houses settle. And then the noise came again, a thud, a creak, as if something had moved on the top floor. I attempted to drive it away, reading from the book that sat on my lap. But again, the noises returned, more urgent, more persistent. It wasn't the house settling this time. It was something other. Something intentional. Despite intuition, I got up and moved in the direction of the stairs. The second floor corridor was darker than normal, shadows more acute, as if reaching out toward me. I attempted to will myself into calmness that it was nothing. A rat within walls, a groan of a floorboard at best. There was, however, something within the quiet of the house that hinted otherwise. I descended to the stairs, my heart in my chest. The house was quiet now, quietly silent. I could hear nothing but the thumping of my own heart in my head. I waited and gazed up into the darkness above, where only a thin line of light filtered through the window. I breathed thinly. Something was not right. I ascended the stairs slowly, and with each step, the stairs creaked under my weight. The farther up I went, the denser the air grew. The air itself was suffocating me, like the house was taking its breath. anticipating I would find out something I wasn't supposed to. I entered the stairs and the hallway. I was moving slowly since I was moving into the room nearest to the door on my left, the direction from which the sounds were coming. The door was slightly open, admitting only the width of darkness into the hallway. My fingers shook as I held the doorknob. Cold, it was a relief from the heat of my own hand. I gasped for air before I opened the door. The room was small inside, only room for a dresser and a bed, but above all I felt the quiet. There was no breath, no movement, and the room vibrated with an unseen presence. I glanced about the room in a hurry for some clue, but everything was neat, nothing which would have stopped me. The walls were empty, except for a colored painting lying on the floor on its side. The floor was messy and there was stale perfume hanging in the air. I moved deeper down, my senses irritated by the room's corner, where something suspicious drew my attention. I thought at first it was an illusion, a shadow on the wall maybe, but moving closer I could see it better, a shape. It was white, nearly transparent, but it was there, impossibly etched into the very texture of the room. There was a dark, amorphous shape in the corner. Its shape was so indistinct, so twisted, that no features could be made out. And yet, there was the presence. I came back, my brain reeling from attempting to comprehend what I was witnessing. But before I might have gotten any kind of notion of what was occurring, the room cooled. Ice that crawled and made hairs on the nape of my throat stand up. The temperature dropped so fast that I literally could see my breath fogging in front of me, as if the room was a portal to another world, a world I never wanted to return to. Whoever was sitting in the corner was as stiff as a board, gazing off into space. I could feel it behind me, even though there were no details to look at. It was like it was gazing at me, watching everything I did. A creeping dread fell upon me, a crushing claustrophobia that alerted me to the fact that I was no longer alone in the room. And as suddenly as the chill had descended, the air began to warm once more, and I was left there in the stillness, frightened and bewildered. I wheeled and ran from the room, my heart afire. I closed the door behind me, almost greedily hungry to be out of whatever it was that I had just witnessed. But as I gasped in the corridor, I knew with a chill certainty that I wasn't alone. Not now, not here. It only became worse from there the next days. It started with small things barely perceptible at all. Things I had left in one spot were shifted to another. The lights switched on and off, shadows that seemed to stretch across rooms abnormally. The atmosphere of the house, otherwise indefinite, grew somber, full of some vague thing, something fleeting in appearance. Nights were spent under the quiet of slow, heavy footsteps that rang down the hallways. I'd wake up in the morning to discover that my bedroom door was ajar, though I could have sworn I'd closed it when I went to bed. And there was always this feeling that I was being watched, a creepy feeling that someone or something was ever so slightly behind me, watching my every move. I attempted to sweep it under the rug, telling myself that it was all in my head. But I knew better. I could sense it in the pit of my stomach, the knot in my muscles at every creak and groan, the glance over the edge of each room, waiting for something I couldn't quite identify. And then one evening it arrived, uninvited and unwelcome. The presence that had been hovering at the edges of my awareness was no more. I was in the sitting room reading, as was my habit, when the door was tapped softly. It was a soft, near-silent touch, but there was no question. I rose with heart racing and walked to the door. No one was out in front of the door when I peeped through the peephole, just the night. Yet something did not seem right. The air beyond the door felt different, colder somehow. I pushed the door open slowly, and there was nothing but the empty porch. And yet, when I emerged, I heard the faintest sound, a soft whisper on the breeze. I spun around the house, horrified. The door closed behind me with a jolt that shook the windows. The whisper was a scream, echoing in my brain, until I could almost hear the words, "You're not alone." The air thickened, as if the air itself was being choked by the stranger in my house. I backed into the living room, my head spinning at what I'd just seen. "You're not alone." The words hung in my head, running up against hard finality. I didn't know how and why it was occurring, yet I was as sure of this much. Something, no, someone, existed there. With me. Not a feeling, but a tangible thing. A growing apprehension that had entered my world. I planted myself on the couch's edge, attempting to settle myself down. The hush now was heavy, chock full of danger. My gaze frantically swept the house every which way, holding on to some familiarity hard for something to hold on to. Warm and friendly walls that were once so, now suffocating over me, curving shape, at insane angles. The house itself seemed to move, as though it too had been awakened, breathing, thudding with some plan I was not privy to. And then, as if to authenticate I wasn't dreaming, the temperature fell once again. It was instantaneous, a scorching, slashing cold that cut through the bulk of my clothes. I saw my breath, misty fingers curling the air. The overhead lights, flickering, started humming, their weak light casting evil shadows on the walls. The whispers came back, but louder, nearer. I could sense the breath of the person or entity that was speaking to me. Turn around. I was there, my heart thudding. The last thing I could afford to do was look around. I knew, some sort of inner sense told me, what would happen if I did. I would see something I shouldn't. But the urge to obey was too powerful. Against my will, my head was turning slowly, tortuously, as if in slow motion. I stood in the doorway to the hall, and nothing. The hall was black, but the blackness pulsed, alive, as if something stared at me. The quiet was heavy, a vacuum in my ears against them so that even breathing was stifled. And then out of the hall's darkness a figure coalesced. It was there but for an instant at first, a dark, undefined shape but coalescing. A shadowy, dark, tall thing constructed out of the darkness itself. Not a presence at rest, nor yet a formed presence, but it was certain. A man-thing's, its form twisting and writhing, as though it were made of the air itself, bending to some unguessed whim. The body did not travel like a man's. It traveled as if it were floating an inch or two above the ground, never touching as it traveled along. The air grew cold as it approached, and with each step that it took, it wrapped the sensation of fear in a tight knot around my neck. The creature had a black, tattered cloak draped over its body, hood over its eyes, concealing its face. But even though I couldn't see its face, I knew, it gazed at me. My arms locked up, body immobile, where I stood stuck, gazing at the creature before me. I wanted to scream, to flee, but my arms weren't cooperating. I was spellbound by it, mesmerized. The moans swelled to a chorus of sound and threatening, then suddenly one solitary word cut through the din loud and clear. Stay. There was a malevolent, dense presence in the air surrounding me, and an intake of breath. The shape moved forward again, its motion so sudden that it seemed to ripple the air around it. My brain was screaming at me to get moving, to run, but paresthesia of fear stiffened me. I closed my eyes, and in doing so the shape vanished. My breath was limited to stammering gasps, and I moved back, my heart pounding within my chest. The room remade itself as well, shadows not moving, cold, gone. I alone, seemed to, filled its space with what had come back. Fear in where there had been hope and questioning crept through me in a desperation to tear out at the center of the being. I had no idea what to do. Do I go? Do I fight this thing? But the idea of going out at night, by myself, with nowhere to go, made me shiver. I could not remain here. I could not remain in a house full of so much evil. But I could not go. I walked back and forth in the living room, not knowing whether to leave or dumb fear that whatever was worst outside was on the other side of the door. The same walls that had once been home were now claustrophobic, forcing me to decide. And then there was the sound, a faint creaking of a step. These ones, this time, did not come from overhead, not from over. No, these were most definitely behind me. They were intentional, planned, ringing through in the quiet of the house. I did not have to look around and try to determine what it was. I knew. The presence, it was here, in the spot where I was lying back, watching. I attempted to turn and look at the unseen terror, but nothing. Nothing except the room I had paced back and forth in. My head screamed at me to wake up from the nightmare, but I knew I wasn't leaving. Not now. Not with it in my house. I fell back onto the couch, gasping, my chest constricted with horror. The footsteps ceased, but the weight of what occurred after was heavier than the noise that provoked them could ever be. The air in the house was thick now, with heavy things that filled up lungs and stayed in them. The house had lingered nearby, waiting for me to pay attention to it. Call. The walls closing in on me, the blackness growing thicker and thicker. And then, far off in the back of the house, I heard a low whisper, not inside my head, but inside my head. "You're ours now." The house had been waiting for me the entire time,